People dependent on conflict are at war with themselves. Living with individuals addicted to conflicts is like navigating an emotional minefield, an unstable terrain that can explode at any moment. These individuals create an atmosphere charged with tension, inducing insecurity in everyday relationships. However, exploring this dependency requires a look beyond the surface, to the root of a behavior that goes beyond a simple desire to argue. Conflict dependency, a phenomenon studied by Dr. Bill Eddy, is a condition that needs to be addressed seriously, as 15% of the adult population may suffer from some form of mental illness, of which 10% may be inclined to deliberately seek conflict. A closer analysis reveals the anatomy of anger, a force that can destabilize not only personal relationships but also the broader social fabric. Individuals dependent on conflict exhibit a series of distinctive traits, including black and white thinking, low emotional control, and a propensity to destabilize situations and people. These individuals live in an emotional world dominated by negativity, unable to reflect on their behavior or show empathy. But what leads a person to become dependent on conflict? The answer often lies in deep emotional imbalances and a lack of control over emotions. Instead of facing challenges constructively, these individuals transform frustration into anger, trying to blame others for their difficulties. Managing individuals dependent on conflict requires self-awareness and a strategic approach. Ignoring them may be a temporary solution, but in an interconnected society, it's inevitable to encounter these personalities. The key is not to take their reactions personally, as these individuals are actually at war with themselves. Avoiding unnecessary arguments and focusing on how to counteract negative influence becomes crucial. However, beyond the relational aspect, it is essential to recognize that people dependent on conflict need help. Professionals such as social workers, lawyers, psychologists, and psychiatrists often come into contact with these personalities, as they frequently end up in legal cases, complaints, and violent situations. Integrating conflict dependency into psychological diagnoses is a step toward awareness and treatment. While it may be tempting to label people dependent on conflict as troublemakers, it is essential to recognize the complexity behind this behavior. Behind the facade of someone constantly seeking conflict, deep mental wounds may hide, requiring understanding and assistance. Addressing this dependency requires not only relational tactics but also a clinical approach aimed at healing the inner wounds of those at war with themselves. Exploring people dependent on conflict requires an effort beyond the surface, digging into the deep roots of this emotional dependency. While it may be tempting to label them as troublemakers, the picture is more complex, requiring an in-depth understanding of the psychological dynamics fueling this behavior. Dr. Bill Eddy emphasizes that 15% of the adult population may suffer from some form of mental illness, with 10% of them inclined to deliberately seek conflict. This raises a fundamental question: what drives people to become dependent on conflict? A crucial answer lies in their inability to manage complex emotions and resorting to black and white thinking. Faced with challenging situations, these individuals react with aggression or criticism rather than adopting a flexible approach. The analysis of those dependent on conflict reveals a set of distinctive traits: low emotional control, reduced reflective ability, difficulty expressing empathy, and a tendency to avoid responsibility. Immersed in a world dominated by negative emotions, these individuals become destabilizing agents, spreading lies, shame, and criticism in their interactions. Managing people dependent on conflict requires deep awareness, a resistance to taking their reactions personally, and a targeted strategy to counteract negative influence. However, it goes beyond managing daily relationships. Conflict dependency is a clinical issue involving professionals such as social workers, lawyers, and psychologists, as these personalities often become involved in complex legal and violent situations. Recognizing the need for help is crucial. Conflict dependency should be integrated into psychological diagnoses, opening the door to targeted treatments to address the deep roots of this condition. Specialists can work on key elements such as emotional control, aggression management, and the development of relationships based on empathy and respect. In conclusion, behind the facade of those constantly seeking conflict, complex mental wounds hide, requiring a deeper understanding. Addressing conflict dependency requires not only relational strategies but also a clinical commitment to heal the inner wounds of those at war with themselves. I bid you farewell, thanking you once again for your comments and testimonials. I invite you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and to leave your comment. As you know, I always read them and respond to everyone with pleasure.